What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Spectator Sports, episode 76. We are back in the DMV after my week-long trip. Happy to be back. Had a great time over in the Southwest. Got to explore a lot of cool things out in Arizona, but always it's good to be home. And we're back to a regular scheduled programming here on Spectator Sports. So let's do some housekeeping before we get into today's episode covering Week 8's action across the NFL. So if you're new to the channel, please do me a massive favor, like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Take a look at our Instagram and TikTok pages. You can get the audio from this episode on Spotify. All links are in the description, and we have made playlists for you guys to check out clips from full podcasts. All links are in the description. Well, it looks like James Harden got his wish. He got his trade to the LA Clippers in a massive Woj bomb that dropped overnight around 2 a.m. Eastern. And it's a massive deal that allows the Clippers to get an extra piece that they needed, and now the 76ers finally get to move out of the whole James Harden drama after a tumultuous summer with him calling GM Daryl Morey a liar, and they used to be quite tight. I mean, remember that Daryl Morey was a guy that went to bat for James Harden countless times, even comparing him and even saying that he was a better scorer than Michael Jordan. It's totally flipped on its head with the whole contract situation, and that was really soured the relationship into what it is today. Let's talk about the compensation of this deal. The LA Clippers are sending Marcus Morris Sr., KJ Martin, Robert Covington, and Nicholas Batum a 2028 first-round pick and a pick swap later on. And I think this is very minimal to give up for a guy of James Harden's talent. Now, question is whether he can play to the level of that talent is a big question mark. Now, the Clippers are going to be receiving PJ Tucker as well in this trade, and he's been a little bit long in the tooth. I don't think he's the same guy as he used to be with the Milwaukee Bucks or the Houston Rockets, but still a very viable wing defender that you can use in small ball lineup. Or the amount of investment you have to give up for James Harden, you got to keep Norm Powell, you got to keep Terrence Mann, two guys that I thought were must giveaways to get James Harden, you were able to keep. So that's a massive win for the LA Clippers. And to talk about the Clippers' depth, they are giving up guys on the bottom part of their roster, but I don't think that since they played significant minutes in the Clippers rotation that they'll be truly missed. Yes, they're wing defenders, but the fact that they barely cracked the NBA hardcourt on a consistent basis is something that I don't think the Clippers were even thinking of using. They were tied to numerous trade rumors beforehand, and the fact that you're able to get something in return for guys that barely even play, I think is a big win. Ty Lue, again, has to orchestrate all these parts, right? It's now Kawhi Leonard, PG, newly added James Harden, and then how does Russell Westbrook fit into this equation? These are all aging stars. They're either in their early 30s or mid 30s even, and I think it's a perfect time to go all in at this point. You're banking on hopefully Kawhi can give you 55 to 60 games. PG can give you about 60 to 65 games when healthy, and then Russ is going to be there. He's been a fairly durable player, but it's a matter of whether or not his play will be impacted because his game is fairly similar to James Harden. They both need the ball, and neither of them really work the greatest off ball. I think James maybe has a little bit more of that spot up ability, so he could work sometimes off ball, but there's a question of now you have to stagger the minutes. I think there'll be very few occasions where we'll see James Harden and Russell Westbrook on the floor at the same time just because their skill set is so different. It's going to be a lot of your turn, my turn type of stuff, and I don't think that's the most ideal way to utilize the offense. Can the Clippers' health hold up for the marathon season? It remains to be seen. We've known that Kawhi especially has faded out. He's been not totally available, and same thing with Paul George. So it's a big if, but at this point, you're going to have to take a swing, and I think this is the best way to do so. It's very minimal to give up. I don't know how much it moves the needle because the West, I still think, goes through Denver, and you still have some other teams in that equation that I think are maybe a smidge better than what the LA Clippers are as presently constructed, and after installing James Harden into the lineup. I think the Phoenix Suns are looking better, and the Golden State Warriors are back to a very good start. So right now, I think they're in that 4 or 5 seed conversation, maybe with the LA Lakers, but they still will be a fairly big threat out west. For the Sixers, this was simply addition by subtraction. You're getting rid of the toxicity that James Harden brought to you, and now you get to allow Tyrese Maxey to develop into hopefully being maybe that fringe all-star guard that you see in him. He has looked the part. It's now going to be more responsibility on him, more responsibility on Joel Embiid, and then these other guys now, they can be spot-up shooters, and I think that's a great ideal fit because Tobias Harris, he has regressed, but he can still be a decent third, fourth option. You have Nicholas Batum who can defend Morocco as well. Obviously well past their prime, but still viable options that you can use. And now you have some depth compared to just having one guy who is a little bit more offense than defense. If James Harden plays to the standard that the Clippers expect him to be this year, I do expect him to at least offer James Harden a contract with around the $30 to $35 million range on a yearly salary basis. Maybe the marriage can work long term, but if it doesn't, they can simply just let him walk and try to reset the roster in 2024. It's the battle for New York, and we got to see Zach Wilson and the New York Jets take on the Tyrod Taylor-led New York Giants. The Giants had another great performance from their talented D-line. They got after Zach Wilson 4 times, with Kayvon Thibodeau having 3 sacks of his own, and then Dexter Lawrence having the 4th sack for the team. Unfortunately, with Tyrod Taylor being knocked out of the game with a rib injury, this really handicapped the Giants' offensive game plan. They only threw it 7 times in this entire game, and they had to rely on Saquon Barkley and Tommy DeVito and the other backs that they have for the New York Giants. And it's disappointing. I mean, Tyrod Taylor, I thought, was looking pretty good and might even usurp Daniel Jones to take over as the starter for the foreseeable future. But with this injury, Daniel Jones is probably close to returning, so I expect him to get the start next week. This was a defensive slugfest. The final score is 13-10, and both teams combined to go 4 out of 34 on 3rd down. The Jets didn't convert their first 3rd down conversion until the 4th quarter, and they really struggled to move the ball for much of this game. With a couple bursts from Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson, yes, that provided the little amount of offense that they had, but big credit to the Jets for forcing overtime. They took advantage of a couple Graham Gano missed kicks, and for Graham Gano, who is fairly consistent as a kicker in this league, I think his seat is getting a little hot because last week he allowed the Washington Commanders to get back into that game with a missed kick, and 2 missed kicks, especially the second one, is a pretty big miscue at that frame of the game. It changes what your defense has to do. Defending 3 is extremely difficult. That's about 30, 40 yards if you're taking it from the 25-yard line. But if you have to defend the whole length of the field, that's extra insurance, right? That's a longer field that the offense has to go to win or even tie the game. So big missed opportunity there. Greg Zuerlein sends the game into overtime, and the Giants offense sputters, giving the Jets good field position, and they were able to walk off winning 13-10. Zach Wilson has now led a game-tying drive and a game-winning drive in the very same game. And after the big struggles that he had in September after Aaron Rodgers went down, he is able to bounce back. He's not gaudy. He's not having any gaudy stats, but the offensive coaching staff has really adjusted to what his strengths are. We're seeing a lot better production out of this Zach Wilson-led offense compared to what it used to be. And right now, he's managing the game, keeping the turnovers down, and if he can continue to do that, the Jets could be a playoff team. They're just a game out of the wild card spot, the 7th seed. They are out on a tiebreaker right now with the Pittsburgh Steelers. But I think that's an opportunity for these New York Jets to take advantage and get back into the playoff mix. They already have a win against Buffalo. They can challenge those other teams in the AFC and AFC East. We've seen that against the Kansas City Chiefs. They gave them everything they could. We'll see what happens as the season progresses with the New York Jets, but I'm very impressed. Now, I wanted to give this a little bit of time because now we are 6 weeks out of the Aaron Rodgers torn Achilles surgery. He is looking like on an accelerated pace to return from this devastating injury. Now he is off crutches, off a brace, and throwing the ball as well. Now, that mobility, we haven't seen that just yet, but it's crazy to think that there's maybe a shred of a chance that he's able to come back for a playoff run. If the Jets are competitive and Zach Wilson can just keep them in the playoff mix and even get them into the playoffs, let's say it's January, that's only 5 months post Achilles surgery, I think there might be a chance that you might see Aaron Rodgers back. Now, will we see that? Not entirely sure. Aaron Rodgers has clearly proved to be a different guy in terms of rehabilitation and what he does with his body. But if he's able to do this, this would be a fantastic story. I am not sure I want to believe it when I see it, but obviously things need to continue to progress. He needs to be cleared by the doctors and be part of this Jets team moving forward. He's doing the best he can, but for right now, let's also pump the brakes. This may not also happen. I think if you're really looking from the Jets' long-term perspective, just let Zach Wilson finish this thing off and come back with the whole training camp. Don't rush, because the risk of re-injury would be just as devastating as that unfortunate start to this season for New York Jets. Tennessee made some waves in Week 7 into Week 8. They traded their all-pro safety Kevin Byard to the Philadelphia Eagles, and this gave us alert that maybe they're having a fire sale. They have been struggling for much of this season, but we always know that a Mike Vrabel team is going to compete with everything they have. They made a switch at quarterback with Ryan Tannehill now hurt. They got to give the rookie Will Levis a start, his rookie debut, and he had a phenomenal day. For once, we got to see DeAndre Hopkins featured in this Titans offense, and they combined for 3 touchdowns, and that is more production that we see than what Ryan Tannehill has been able to provide for the entirety of the season. So I think Ryan Tannehill's days are certainly numbered. We've heard about it with Malik Willis, and that experiment didn't work out. But it seems that Will Levis, after just one start, is looking a lot better than the recent production that we see out of Ryan Tannehill. He's been injured, he's been banged up, he's an older quarterback, and I wouldn't be surprised if they decide to stay with Will Levis. He's the younger quarterback. They want to evaluate what he can do, and who knows? I mean, they are still very much alive in this playoff race. I don't think they'll really get back into the playoff race, but from one perspective where they were thinking of, let's tank the year, let's trade Derrick Henry, trade our remaining assets, and now we are back and gunning for a playoff push yet again. For the Atlanta Falcons, this was the first time we got to see Desmond Ridder be benched. He didn't return to the lineup after the first half. We got to see Taylor Heineke take over as the starter. Now, the offense didn't look as great either. It's hard to be thrown into the second half of the game and try to salvage it, but maybe if they decide to go a different direction, because it seems that Arthur Smith has grown tired and frustrated with Desmond Ridder's play. The last couple of games before this game, he struggled with turnovers and ball security. There was too many crucial mistakes, and right now, what Taylor Heineke provides, it's wild, and it can be a little bit off script, but maybe this gives the Atlanta Falcons a better chance. They're still leading this very bad NFC North. They seem to be the best of the worst division in football, but I'm not sure what exactly the direction that Atlanta wants to go. They have the weapons as we talked about. They have a really good offensive line. It remains to be seen who can really operate this offense that Arthur Smith wants to run. Very odd, obviously, for fantasy owners, because last week we didn't hear a lot of Bijan Robinson. He only had 1 carry, and it really frustrated gamblers and also fantasy owners. We've always heard about these struggles with Kyle Pitts after his sophomore year. It's weird how they're utilizing these very talented weapons. I think Drake London has been probably the most productive player, but I do think that they have something there, but I just don't know if Arthur Smith is the right guy to lead this Atlanta team anymore. The Vikings have looked hot recently. They've started the season 0-3, but responded to a 4-4 start, winning their last 4 out of 5 games. But this win today was very costly. Unfortunately for Kirk Cousins, it seems that he's torn his Achilles tendon. MRIs are going to confirm that on Monday, but for right now, it seems that his season is done. And where he is at his career, it's just truly devastating. I mean, this was maybe the one asset, depending on how the Minnesota Vikings do, that you could potentially trade at Tuesday's deadline, but that has now completely plummeted in terms of value. You can't trade a quarterback that has a torn Achilles tendon anymore. So for Kirk, very disappointed, very sad, because he was having a stellar year. And I mean, I know he'll be recovering, maybe come back for the start of next year, but it could be a cap casualty for this Minnesota Vikings. They have a lot of players to pay, especially Justin Jefferson. And an aging quarterback like Kirk Cousins won't be cheap. From what at least his aura and pass play has done. Now, the biggest question mark is how will he look post Achilles rehab? But I'm not entirely sure. This could be going one direction or the other, because he is an older quarterback. It is just completely up in the air. And for the Vikings, I mean, this couldn't come at a worse time right now. I think now with the season, they were looking at potential buyers for this trade deadline. They could be sellers and just trying to compile as many picks as possible for future plans with this franchise. The Washington Commanders have always played the Philadelphia Eagles tough. In the past few matchups, we've seen a lot of one-possession games and a lot of back and forth where Washington gets off to a big start, but then Philly's able to rally. That same thing happened yet again on Monday. They were trailing 14-3 to the Washington Commanders on the road, but slowly chipped away at it. And this is mainly thanks to just the stellar play of A.J. Brown, who we'll get into a little bit later, but also this defense who made timely turnovers when necessary. Jalen Hurts has looked like a little bit all over the place to start this year, but this was probably his best passing game. He had 4 passing touchdowns. He had a bad fumble at the goal line on a brotherly shove attempt, but in terms of passing the ball, I thought this was the best time where he was making decisions, and big credit to what he's been able to do, having 4 passing touchdowns, 2 to AJ, 1 to Julio, and 1 to Devontae Smith. I had my concerns though, because in the first half, the secondary was getting torched by Sam Howell, and if Sam Howell continues to play at this cliff, he's going to be a thorn in the Eagles' side for years to come. He is so talented. I think the ball gets up very quick, and that's able to neutralize such a deep defensive line that we have in Philly. He passed for nearly 400 yards. He was completing above 75% of his passes for much of this game, and very nearly was able to rally his team to another win against Philadelphia. Just like the first matchup where the Eagles won in overtime 34-31. In this game, again, it was tricky, but as the Eagles were able to improve with defensive stops, including an interception by Reed Blankenship, who was having a terrible game for much of this ball game with just getting beat in coverage, not making plays. But that interception turned the game on its head. When it was tied after Smitty scored the equalizing touchdown, we thought, game on, 24-24. Anyone's game, but that interception turned the tide for the Eagles' favor. They were able to get the go-ahead touchdown to Julio Jones, and then that defense can pin its ears back now that they have a lead to protect. And Hassan Reddick, who's been probably the Eagles' defensive closer as of late, did so again. He had a crucial 4th down sack that evaporated any sort of Washington Commander comeback hopes. So Hassan has looked so good in the past 4 games. After the first month where he was dealing with that thumb injury and a cast, he was clearly a shell of himself. But since then, in the last 4 games, he's had 6.5 sacks. He's up there amongst the leading sack leaders yet again. And imagine what he could do if he didn't have that thumb injury in the first 4 games of the season. So big credit to what Hassan Reddick has done. He's looking just like the All-Pro that we saw last year. I'm sure he's going to continue to go on a tear as he's done for much of this season. Again, the turnovers for the offense, especially 2 inside the 5-yard line, are going to be concerning to me. I mean, turnovers being on the negative side of this turnover differential has been the biggest red flag I've seen with this Eagles team. They don't take care of the ball. Jalen has been up there amongst the lead leaguers in turnovers, but they're finding ways to win. I mean, they're 7-1 not playing their best ball. And with the results that happened on Sunday, we got to see that Kansas City loss. We saw that the San Francisco 49ers have dropped their third straight. So the Eagles have outright the best record in the NFL at 7-1. They're the lone one-loss team. If they can just get this together, the red zone issues, the turnover, and cut that down, they're going to be a juggernaut yet again. Let's talk about A.J. Brown. I mean, yes, Tyreek Hill is on pace for 2,000 yards, and that should be absolutely celebrated. The Cheetah is probably the best receiver in this league just due to his sheer speed. But with A.J., I mean, throw a go ball, throw a fade, throw a jump ball. I'm very confident that he's going to come down with that contested catch. He has been on a tear the last 6 games, having 125 yards plus in each of them, an NFL record, beating out Megatron's consecutive streak of 5. What he's able to do, he's attacks the ball with such precision. He is able to catch it, go for a slant. He's able to catch it and get a lot of yak yards. He's able to catch things and juggle them with his footwork. I mean, the guy is a route running technician, so physical, just a true matchup nightmare. But for right now, A.J. Brown, I think, is the second best receiver in the NFL. The Dallas Cowboys got another blowout win, this time against the LA Rams, and they looked unstoppable. I mean, when they're able to get off to fast starts, they are probably such a menacing team. I mean, they're just like this boulder that gathers so much momentum and is able to run over and steamroll anybody in their path. And this time it was the LA Rams. They forced turnovers, a pick 6 by Deron Bland, his 3rd interception of the year, and their special teams was able to force a safety off a block punt. And if they're able to do this consistently, there's nothing going to stop them at all. But when you have teams that can challenge them, especially with teams that have good cornerbacks, that can take away CeeDee Lamb and force them to beat you with Jake Ferguson and Brandon Cooks, for example. That is where the game gets transferred to Dak. We've seen him struggle in these bigger matchups, but we know that in this game he was looking pretty good. 4 touchdown passes. CeeDee Lamb was looking phenomenal. 2 touchdown grabs, over 150 yards receiving, and he's up there with one of the best receivers in this league. But I still have my concerns because they lack that consistent number 2 guy, because Michael Gallup has not really panned out post ACL injury, and I'm just curious to see what the offense will look, because this trade deadline is coming up. I think they need an additional weapon to really help take pressure off of Dak Prescott in this offense, because they have Philadelphia coming in next week, and we've seen the Dallas defense, as vaunted as they are, they can get run up and down the field. So last time, at least in Philly, they were able to get grinded out, worn down, and that's the best way to neutralize Micah Parsons. So big test next week on the road. If they're able to do so, I think that's a big pass for them after their blowout loss to San Francisco. But right now, I'm very enticed to see what this matchup with Philly will be next week. The Rams, I think this is yet another loss that pushes them being sellers at the trade deadline coming up. I think Aaron Donald's value won't be any higher in his career, and it's best to just trade him and get some picks to help this youth movement, because they've gathered a lot of picks after trading their first round picks for Jalen Ramsey, Matthew Stafford, and countless other names to bolster that epic 2021 team. But we know that there's a lot of things that they have. We know that there's a lot of holes that this LA Rams team needs to fill. I think right now, with Matthew Stafford aging, there's a lot of up in the air about his status, whether or not he'll come back for another season. He's been banged up, and I think it's best to reset the roster and just try to have a fire sale of sorts to help get some younger talent on this Rams team. Before the Kansas City Chiefs met the Denver Broncos on Sunday afternoon, we heard reports that Patrick Mahomes is dealing with flu-like symptoms, and I just thought that this was the narrative that they were trying to create, that Patrick Mahomes is going to have a flu game of sorts, just like MJ did. He didn't look like himself, let's say that for the very least. He was very sloppy with the ball, 3 turnovers, as the Chiefs' offense was shut down to just 9 points. And as much as we can maybe blame it on his lack of health with this flu bug, I think the fact that he's able to suit up in this format is not an excuse. I mean, 2 interceptions that weren't really that good. He didn't have pocket awareness on the strip sack. So, yeah, it was his worst game of the year, and we can take it with a grain of salt that he wasn't feeling the best. In that first matchup, the Denver Broncos had a winning performance defensively. They restricted Kansas City to just 19 points. It's just that Russell Wilson and that offense couldn't get anything going. This time, they took advantage of the 5 turnovers that they forced, and Russell Wilson had 3 passing TDs. This is probably his best game of the year. And for defense that gave up 70 points, to respond like this against a Patrick Mahomes-led team, restrict them to just single digits, that's a huge turnaround from what we've seen from them in the past. The Broncos have been struggling to generate any type of consistency this year. I think this might pause some talks of them having a fire sale at the deadline because they're trying to do a total reset. But still, they should try to look and get as many picks as possible, just like the LA Rams, because right now, Sean Payton doesn't have what he needs to really make this a contender, and he needs picks to do so. The Chiefs, outside of the Patrick Mahomes flu bug issue, I think they really lack a true wide receiver. Travis Kelce is their go-to offensive weapon, very clear. But they don't even have a 2. They have a bunch of 3s. Sky Moore, MVS, Kadarius Toney, and now a newly reacquired Mecole Hardman. They are a bunch of 3rd option type of receivers. Yeah, they have their little spurts. They can have moments, but consistently they have come up short. And again, Brett Veach is going to probably have to go at the trade deadline to find another weapon. I'm sure there's a disgruntled receiver out there that they can trade for and get some maximum usage out of for the remainder of the year. I don't know who it may be, who's available at this moment, but they definitely need to look at the receiving room and get some pressure, because right now force feeding Travis Kelce is great, but when they have those off days, they're going to have to find somebody else to beat one-on-one man coverage consistently. Brock Purdy was in concussion protocol for much of this week, and he was able to clear it on Friday and make the start against the Cincinnati Bengals. But again, he banged his head on the turf with that whiplash kind of motion. You have to have some concerns, because with the player sustaining multiple concussions, we saw that last year with Tua, and Brock is a smaller guy, and in the last 3 weeks that resulted in losses, the San Francisco 49ers, especially Brock Purdy, have looked very bad. A lot of turnovers are piling up for Brock. I mean, it's not looking the greatest. Those 2 interceptions he threw last week against the Minnesota Vikings, and then 2 crucial turnovers that were interceptions and a lost fumble for a total of 3. And we gotta now ask the question, is Brock in a slump, and is he maybe reverting back to the mean? We know that Brock has gotten off to a hot start. He won his first 10 regular season starts, and he was looking great for much of last season and the first 5 games of this year. Like I said, these turnovers have begun to pile up, and he's had issues with being healthy. We know that there was a reason why he was a 7th round pick. He was smaller, not the biggest arm, and now with not being surrounded by an all-world cast, as still Deebo Samuel remains out due to an injury, Brock has now been tasked to take on more of this load, and he's just falling short. I would like to see him respond, but 3 losses in a row is really a red flag. And the turnovers are coming at crucial moments. It's not just like in the first half and this vaunted San Francisco defense is able to get a stop on the next possession. These are turning into touchdowns and teams getting back into the game or lengthening their lead. Both times in this game against the Cincinnati Bengals, Joe Burrow was able to take advantage for touchdowns, and it's beginning to be a concern. I think that this 13-game sample size, especially those last 3 games, are becoming tall telling signs and bringing questions and concerns, because you got to feel for Kyle Shanahan, right? He has had this great offensive scheme. It's just a matter of, can he find the guy to lead this offense? Because he had to deal with Jimmy Garoppolo. He had Trey Lance. That trade didn't go anywhere. And now Brock Purdy. A lot of what ifs. They have their moments, yes, and they have this really talented defense. But there's been consistent lapses with this San Francisco 49er team that hasn't turned into that last piece that they need to push through and win that championship. So they have some things to adjust. It's only 7 weeks into this year. I think they can very well turn the tide, but with them being 2 games back of Philly, I mean, that's a big ask to come back from. And right now, they're even in second place in the NFC West. They trail Seattle. So I think they have a lot to work on, but it's definitely not uncorrectable. And that's it for this episode of Spectator Sports. Thank you guys for tuning in. Greatly appreciated. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Thank you, Joey, for editing this podcast, and I'll catch you on the next one. Take care.